Sometimes you just need a little one. I've got two little ones. I've got the Sony XB12. I've got the Soundcore Mini 3. I haven't had the previous two, so I can't compare it to the previous two, but I'm going to compare it to the Sony XB12. These are two mini speakers. They're certainly small. And how small are they now? Well, we've got the Sony XB12, it's 243 grams. We've got the Sony Mini 3, it's even lighter at 223 grams. They may be small, but do they pack a punch? I can tell you on paper the Sony is a 5-watt speaker. We're not talking boom boxes here, but we are talking little speakers that may, give you a bit more than you might expect in a little package. The Soundcore Mini 3 is 6 watts. I'm going to give you a little teaser straight up. I'm going to show you what the frequency response looks like. Might give you a little clue as to how they're going to sound.
Sony XB12, Soundcore Mini 3 in default mode, which is the signature mode. They're quite similar in that they are very linear and there's no bass adjustment at lower volumes. But the Sony, the big peak, 4 kilohertz, again around 15, 16 kilohertz. I mean, that's really high to have a peak, promising a very, maybe a shrill sound. By comparison, the Mini 3 looking a little bit more balanced, but again, neither of them have anything in the way of bass. Even if I take 150 hertz, it's already rolled off at 150 hertz. But then they are tiny speakers. Even the volumes look similar, except that the XB12 will peak higher into the high end of the frequency spectrum, both measured at 45 degrees, and with a bit of custom adjustment on the Mini 3, up to about 80%, you can smooth out that sound. So I have pushed that 80 hertz slider all the way up to plus 8 dB just to see what the headroom is. Doing that flattens the sound out considerably. A little push at the high end for clarity, but by the time you hit 100%, limiters are cutting in, you cannot get any more bass out of it. Custom compared to the default mode, as I said, flatter, but when it comes to maximum volume, it's looking like it will be a little bit louder in default mode.
I was checking prices this morning. The Sony XB12 is £36. The Soundcore Mini 3 is £27. That's UK sterling. That's what they were this morning. I had somebody tell me, I keep saying the Motion Plus, I keep saying it's like 90 quid or 80 quid, and he's never seen it below £103. I've never seen it over £99, but I'm not making it up, guys. If I'm telling you, this morning I checked and XB12 is 36 and the Soundcore Mini 3 is £27, the clue is that's because what they were. So if you don't see it at that price, check again. Amazon sometimes do clever tricks. If you keep looking at the same things, sometimes the price does go up. Log in under a different account, check if the price is still the same thing. Now, the Soundcore Mini 3, it's just come out in August of this year. The Sony XB12 is a bit older. Came out in 2000. The Sony came out 2019. In terms of battery capacity, what can you expect? 5.2 watt hours for the Sony XB12, 6.7 watt hours for the Soundcore Mini 3. In terms of the codecs, even on my Android Sony XB12, we know they do LDAC, really nice codec. You won't get that on the Sony XB12. It's too small, too unimportant for them to care about that much in terms of what you can expect. Defaults to AAC even on my Android, whereas the Soundcore Mini 3 got the Motion Boom on my mind. As we would expect, SBC on my Android, it's going to be AAC on your Apple device. Sony, being the oldest speaker, is only Bluetooth 4.2. We've got Bluetooth 5 on the Soundcore. Now, in terms of stereo pairing, you can stereo pair a pair of the Sonys. You got two of them, that's the clue. You'll have stereo. But this is partly cast on the Soundcore Mini, and that's going to mean you can pair up to 100 of them. Wow, that's what we've always wanted, but you can't, if you only have two, you still can't get stereo. So they're going to be playing basically mono, dual mono. If you only have two, you're not going to get stereo, but you can join up to 100 of them in some sort of party. Would you use that as a party speaker? Probably not. USB-C on the new speaker. Being the older speaker, it has an auxiliary, which is becoming an auxiliary input, becoming old-fashioned. You don't have that on the Soundcore Mini. You can use them both as a phone speaker. They do both float, but they both float sideways, so not going to be, if only they floated that way around, I bet you could actually get some sort of rubber ring, tiny little rubber ring, a baby's rubber ring, put it round. I haven't tried it, I bet it would work, and it would float upwards. Now, IP67 for the Sony XB12, that means dustproof, as well as being, you can drop it in water and it will be good for 30 minutes. It floats, so it's not going to go to the bottom, but technically 30 minutes up to 1 meter of water, whereas it's not dustproof, but it is IP7 on the Soundcore. I'm not sure what driver the size is on the Mini 3. I know it's 46mm, and you get a passive radiator on the bottom. They look the same size, so I can assume it's basically the same. You certainly get a passive radiator on the bottom of the Mini 3. So probably something, the woofer, the full range driver, if you like, was going to be about 46mm, I guess. In terms of YouTube latency, really important to a lot of us. It's awful. Actually, it was so bad on the Sony XB12, I could hardly believe it. I had to redo it. I got 240 milliseconds. That's basically, you play it today, you'll get the audio tomorrow, whereas not quite as bad, but it's pretty horrendous. That's the Sony. On pretty horrendous, 160 milliseconds on the Mini 3, but both pretty much unusable in terms of lip sync. That was my experience. These things can be often very device specific. Your experience may be different. Even when I played local files, on average, they're both around 170, 180 milliseconds. That is huge lip sync issues. But of course, whatever you're streaming or doing, if you can adjust the delay, then you're sorted. Doesn't appear to be an app that I can find that works with the Sony XB12. The music center even doesn't state that the XB12 is supported, and I couldn't get a connection. I have seen some people commenting you can have an app with this, but I certainly couldn't get anything working. Whereas not only do we have an app with Soundcore, but we get nice customizable options. Options where you can use an equalizer and embed the settings in the speaker. This seems to be one of the things that keeps coming up. And I'm getting knocked for equalizing some speakers and not the others. Guys, 24 hours in a day, I can't equalize everything. It's not like you set one equalizer. You're going to be adjusting it all the time. So, for many reasons, I only equalize a speaker, A, if it can be embedded in the speaker itself, because that means it's not device specific. Anybody hooking up to that speaker will use the same settings that have been embedded into the speaker. I personally am not a huge fan of software EQ. It depends on your ears, but you know, layering EQ can have unwanted side effects. None of the EQ apps will have the bands everywhere that you need. So for many reasons, only if it's embedded, only if it actually makes a significant difference, only then do I mess around for a little while, seeing what I can do with the EQ. I have done a custom for the Mini 3. Going to play them at 50%. Obviously, they're not going to let going loud anyway. I could say 50% low volume test. There's no high volume test, but they go, but you will get some volume out of them that's just not going to shake your room. So around 50%.
I get the shivers whenever I'm thinking about you. Just wanna leave and live without you. Be on my own again. I get the shivers whenever you go out of line, yeah. I feel the creeping down my spine, yeah. Wanna be alone again.
Mini 3 default mode, XB12. No real pretense of bass on the Sony XB12. It's quite a thin sound, and the pushing, the mids, the upper mids, and basically everything else. We've even got a peak up around the 17 kilohertz mark. That's really, really high to be getting a peak, albeit on a speaker that's designed to play firing upwards. Recorded at 45 degrees. If we're looking at the bass, albeit on very tiny speakers, the Mini 3 is whacking the XB12, which sounds thin at these low volumes, but will sound very clear again, if that's what you want, in terms of, well, if we call 60 hertz the deep bass, it's 10 dB up, 80 hertz, 16 dB up on the XB12. So, might not be talking about deep bass, but in terms of any bass, the Mini 3 massively up on the XB12, and then we can go to custom mode, and the difference is even bigger. At 80 hertz, 22 dB, a more balanced sound on the Mini 3.
I should mention, or should have mentioned, everything is being recorded at 45 degrees. Remember, the treble, the high end, very directional. So if I'm going to get a very different sound if I listen to it like that, and a very different sound if I listen like that. So we're reckoning that most people are going to listen about 45 degrees. I record it at 45 degrees. So just bear that in mind. If you're listening like that, it's going to sound a bit more treble heavy. And if you're listening well off axis, it's going to sound a bit muted to you. Pretty obvious. In those ABs, the Sony XB12 sounds a bit bass-like, if I'm being kind, a bit brittle, a bit thin. I have to say, if you're not A-Bing it like that, because it does slant the way you perceive what you're hearing when you A-B speakers. If I was to hear that on its own, the Sony XB12, sounds fine. Obviously, there's no deep bass there, but it handles vocals pretty well, and it's pretty clear. It doesn't sound horrendous in any way. It sounds okay. But when I hear it next to the Soundcore Mini 3, and obviously when I use custom settings, the bass can, depending on the track, can get out of hand, can get very woolly, but there's certainly some bass to be had. So when you have the two together, whether it's in default mode, which they call the signature mode, or whether it's in a custom versus the XB12, because obviously I can't do EQ on that, then all you're really hearing is the lack of bass on the Sony XB12. It doesn't sound that bad, but there's a big difference in the bass. No bass, some bass. Quite impressive, I guess, for a speaker of that size, that you're getting any bass. We're not talking about deep bass, but we're talking 200, for a speaker like that, 200 hertz and under, I reckon. Let's go a bit louder. Let's go to around 75% volume.
Mini 3 default, XB12 default, as at 50% volume. The XB12, no real bass, massively pushing the mids, the upper mids, and everything towards the high end, even peaking around 17 kilohertz. Mini 3, more balanced, but also pushing those upper mids. But of course, these are upward firing speakers recorded at 45 degrees. In terms of some bass, about the same, 150 hertz, 9 dB up Mini 3 at 80 hertz, 6 dB up at 60 hertz. Custom mode, can't do anything at 60 hertz. At 80 hertz, we're gaining another 4 dB compared to the Mini 3 in its default mode, 3 dB up at 150 hertz.
So the basic differences are still there. It's still a thin sounding speaker on the XB12 by comparison, but if you're not listening out for the bass, it sounds fine. It handles the vocals well. I will say the differences as you got the volume are less because the Mini 3 is reducing its bass, although whereas on the XB12, of course, there was no bass to reduce. So the differences themselves reduce because we're really talking about the bass being the difference. And look, when I say bass, relative bass for a speaker of that size, still getting a lot more bass using a custom mode. But even now in custom, the headroom's going, the difference is less. So just how much headroom is there if we go to a maximum volume?
Yeah, hey, I'm light on my feet. It's like I'm a better me. V2.0 or 3. Yeah, hey, a better me. I only knew what I knew of love from you. It was so one-sided. I only knew one love till it went away. Now I know a little more 'cause I found real love and it's not one-sided. Now I know a little more and he's gonna stay. And now I'm falling, falling into new arms. I'm all in. Finally had a breakthrough. Thank God there's no one like you. So why was I scared to lose you? Silly girl, what a fool. 'Cause now you're gone, I'm great. Oh, oh. I never thought I'd say it. Yeah, yeah, hey. I'm light on my feet. It's like I'm a better me. V2.0 or 3. Yeah, yeah, hey. A better me. For so long I wasn't happy and it showed. I hated that you never told me I was beautiful. I knew that you were right, but I was scared to be alone. Had to love myself enough to let you go. 'Cause now you're gone, I'm great. Oh, oh. I never thought I'd say it. Yeah, yeah, hey. I'm light on my feet. It's like I'm a better me. V2.0 or 3. Yeah, yeah, hey. A better me. Oh, oh. I never thought I'd say it. I'm light on my feet. It's like a better me. Version 2.0 or 3. Gotta love myself enough to let you go. 'Cause now you're gone, I'm great.
So ultimately, technically, if I measure in LUFS, 16.3 makes the Soundcore Mini 3 the loudest of the two. So we're not talking loud between them, and at these volumes, you may not even hear any difference in volume. So they're basically about the same, but technically the Mini 3 goes louder. But the difference in bass is now very different. So I think the Sony handles maximum volume a lot better than the Mini 3. By now, there was no comparison in the bass, 150 hertz, 90 hertz, the Sony XB12 actually has the bigger bass. It's only when you get down to the deep bass, 60 hertz. I'm saying comparatively for the speakers of this size, before it's completely rolled off, then we still have more weight coming from the Mini 3 and a bit more in the custom mode. So ultimately, Sony plays cleaner at maximum volumes, but it's only you're really going to notice that on certain tracks, and not even that it's bass heavy tracks. Just certain tracks don't seem to gel well with the Mini 3. The Sony plays pretty clean by comparison. They go about the same volume. The big difference has been all the way along the bass, and there's still that difference of the bass at maximum volume, but it's much narrower between them. I doubt you're really buying these speakers to play them at maximum volume. It's going to be at lower volumes. Well, then I think, it's hard to do without the bass for me personally on the Mini 3. But the Sony does handle vocals well. It is very clear, and that may be your you may be your priority. Now, these are, I guess, what you call mini speakers. And I have got here some other speakers you've probably noticed. I just thought it would be interesting to compare them because, now I know the prices are quite different, certainly when it comes to the Mini 2, but they are all small speakers. They are certainly all they're all basically almost under 300 grams. It's 312 grams for the Mini 2. It's 289 grams for the Bose Micro. 243 grams, 223. It's not a lot in it. They're all small speakers. I do have the Wonder Boom here. I didn't put down the weight. I put the Wonder Boom here because when I initially got these speakers, I thought, oh, I'll do it against the Wonder Boom 2. A lot of people actually ask that, but when I realised it's twice the size of these other two speakers. Don't think it's particularly fair. You may want to hear that comparison. You'll let me know. However, I haven't done that because actually, in the real world, that won't go in a jacket pocket, and they will do comfortably. Another two speakers that go in your jacket pocket comfortably will be the Mini 2 and the Bose Micro. So I thought this would be interesting to see where we are with these two mini speakers against two much more expensive speakers, about 70 quid for the, I think, isn't it, for the Bose Micro? When I last checked, about 70, it was nearly £100 for the Mini 2. So there is a big difference in price, but if your priority is the dinky little small size, these may be speakers you're thinking, well, is it worth paying, twice or more money? How much more speaker do I get? The fact that they all go in your jacket pocket, I just did a quick test, maximum volume, so you get a handle on what are the actual differences between these four mini speakers.
Lose you. Silly girl, what a fool. 'Cause now you're gone, I'm great. Oh, I never thought I'd say it. Yeah. I'm light on my feet. It's like I'm a better me. V2.0 or 3. Yeah. A better me. For so long I wasn't happy and it showed. I hated that you never told me I was beautiful. I knew that you were right, but I was scared to be alone. Had to love myself enough to let you go. 'Cause now you're gone, I'm great. Oh, I never thought I'd say it. Yeah. I'm light on my feet. It's like I'm a better me. V2.0 or 3. Yeah. Better me. Never thought I'd say it. I'm light on my feet. It's like a better me. Version 2.0 or 3. Gotta love myself enough to let you go. 'Cause now you're gone, I'm great.
In terms of absolute volume, the Minirig Mini 2 is gate crashing the party. It's well ahead of the others. Surprisingly, to me anyway, second place goes to Bose SoundLink Micro, but it's over 6 dB down in perceived terms over the Minirig Mark II. Then not much between the XB12 really and the Mini 3, but technically on LUFS, the Mini 3 in default mode 1.3 dB up on the XB12, but this time around the XB12 is holding on to more bass. When I say bass, obviously not real bass, but relative bass, 150 hertz. It's 4 dB up on the Mini 3, which can't hold its bass as we hit the maximum volumes. The XB12, 2 dB up at 90 hertz, but the Mini 3 does have so-called deep bass, 60 hertz. It's holding on by 5 dB. Custom mode on the Mini 3, it's quietest, you're losing some headroom, and the only thing you're really gaining is a couple of dB at 90 hertz. You gain nothing at 150 or 60 hertz. Minirig Mark II goes loudest by a long way, but at 90 hertz, that's 36.5 dB. It's behind the SoundLink Micro and only about 1 dB up on the Mini 3 in its custom mode. However, at 150 hertz, we're talking up bass. We're not talking warm or deep bass. It is up on the SoundLink Micro a couple of dB, and indeed up on all the others considerably. So the Minirig Mark II, head and shoulders louder. It really holds sway at 150 hertz, but still not a big advantage in terms of bass, much lower than that. Peaks on the XB12 and the Mini 3 in its default mode, almost identical, 87.3, 87.1.
So you pay a bit more money, you do get a louder speaker. However, not always, it's only a teeny fraction louder on the Bose Micro, but it's a completely different form factor. So that is bike friendly, pram friendly, whereas these have straps not so friendly for, you know, not for to strap on a bicycle. So different form factor, different scenarios. Whereas no strap at all on the Mini. I think this is meant to go in a jacket pocket and play blinking loud for the size of speaker. Minirig do seem to kind of go for hi-fi type sound, but volume over deep bass. And while the Mini does have deep bass at 60 hertz for sure, at 90 hertz, well, it's actually not much in it. In fact, slightly edged by the Bose SoundLink Micro. So goes clearly louder, but there's more of the mids and the highs than in terms of deep bass. However, it's impressive, it goes that loud. It is of course a more powerful speaker at 15 watts, and indeed you get aptics. So, you know, there is your real clue. It's, as I always say with Minirig, don't judge it as one speaker, judge it as the potential for the whole upgrade path, the modular system that you can end up with when you buy into Minirig. That's really what it's all about. But so I just thought it would answer the questions that paying a bit more money, how much do I get when I can still put it into my jacket pocket? You will certainly get more volume, considerably more volume out of the Minirig Mini 2. The Bose, it's not much in it, and I think with the Bose, it's going to come down to form factor. Between the Sony and XB12 and the Soundcore Mini 3, it's going to be, do you want clarity and handles vocals well, or do you want more of an all-round sound? Certainly get some more warmth and more bass out of the Mini 3. But if you really, really, really do play these speakers at maximum volume, you're going to get some distortion issues. With the Mini 3, it's going to be track dependent. Hope you got everything you needed out of this particular video, and I thank you for watching.